Good evening, everyone. Matt and I are going to share the story of God's faithfulness in our lives in the time that we've known each other. Matt and I first met in 2018. As many of you know, we previously attended a church called Trinity Lutheran in San Pedro, and that's where we first met. To give a brief background on my own upbringing, my dad is a pastor who is ordained Presbyterian. I grew up in a church called Rolling Hills Covenant in Rolling Hills Estates, which is just a few minutes away from Trinity Lutheran. When I finished my teaching credential and was looking for a job, I ended up accepting a teaching position at Christ Lutheran School in Rancho Palos Verdes, and from there got connected to Trinity Lutheran Church down the street. I made the decision to try out a Lutheran church and discovered that I really connected with not only the people at Trinity Lutheran, but the traditions of the service. Now, Trinity did not have a lot of young adults at the time, and the list of eligible young men was very short. When I started attending Trinity, a few of our friends immediately entered matchmaking mode. Matt and his family had already been attending Trinity for a few years, and when I entered the scene, our matchmaker friends started planning ways they could get us together. Even still today, multiple people take credit for getting us together, and they argue over who gets it. So before we even met, one of my coworkers, who also attended Trinity, sent me a photo of Matt playing volleyball at a youth retreat, and I had to admit, he was pretty cute.
So Sarah kind of knew me a little bit before I met her. I didn't know anything really about Sarah before we met. We met towards the end of 2018. I was a senior in college. At this time, Kira Blackstad, who's the youth director at Trinity currently, she moved to San Pedro to do an internship, a youth internship at the church. And so our pastor and his wife threw kind of this young adult night where she got to meet people her own age and try to make some friends. And it was there that I met the 8th grade teacher at Christ Lutheran Church just down the road, and her name was Sarah Knock. I didn't know anything about Sarah Knock before this, but my first impression of her was, man, she talks a lot. So it suffices to say that our first impressions weren't too memorable, but the year went on. Fast forward, I graduate from college and I go and move to St. Louis, Missouri for my first year of seminary. After 1 year of your seminary, I kind of burnt out. I stayed in contact with my pastor during that time, and in a conversation with him, he said, why don't you come down? I'm starting up a new young adults community, starting up a new internship program, and I want you to be the chaplain of it. And that really appealed to me, and it gave me a chance to try on ministry to see, do I still really want to do this? So I ended up moving to San Pedro, California, and during the summer of 2019, I was the interim youth director until Kira would move back and become the full-time family and youth director there. So during that time, I realized I'm not the most organized person, and that really hindered a lot of the execution of some of the youth stuff that we wanted to do. And so I knew I needed help big time. So I asked around for some help from different people, and one person in particular told me, the 8th grade teacher at Christ Lutheran, Sarah Knock, she really wants to help with youth ministry.
So I never actually said that. Not that I didn't want to, but I already taught middle school all day, every day, so I wasn't necessarily looking to get into youth ministry. So that was one of our matchmaking little people. But it worked. So Matt messaged me asking if I would help, and because it was him asking, I said yes. We planned to meet after church one day to sit down and talk about it, and we both expected it to be a relatively quick business-like conversation, but it actually turned into a 6-hour conversation. We talked about everything under the sun, and I remember driving away after that thinking, what exactly just happened?
Where were we? There we are. So after that, we really hit it off. It was crazy how fast it happened for us. I'm an introverted type person, and for me, conversation with other people normally doesn't just flow like that. So I knew something was starting to spark there, but that did not fit within my 5-year plan. I didn't want to get into a relationship that year because I wanted to move back to St. Louis to finish up seminary after that year. But I realized like how quick this was happening. It seemed like God was doing something. It seemed like God was moving. And it seemed like God had really brought us together. So we fell in love fast. And we had this young adult retreat up at Hume Lake in the September of 2019. So we all go up there as young adults. And Sarah and I end up alone praying a lot together. And during one of these times, I remember hearing her just pray to God. And in hearing her talk to God, I knew I wanted to marry her. So if we fast forward in April of the next year, 2020, April 25th, 2020, I got down on one knee in a poppy field and popped the question, Sarah, will you marry me?
We realized after that I actually never said yes to him, but I put on the ring. I started planning, so there is my answer. The season of engagement, while joyful, was also a time of very high stress as a result of COVID happening at the same time. As the 8th grade teacher at my school, I led the 8th grade Washington, D.C. trip every spring, as well as coordinated the 8th grade graduation. When COVID shut everything down, I had to adjust, like all the other teachers, and figure out how to teach online. On top of that, our DC trip was canceled, and the travel company actually went bankrupt. So I was caught in the mess of trying to get money back to the families. Then throw in an 8th grade graduation and wedding planning, and it caused me to feel more anxious than I've ever felt before. Before I met Matt, I had this weird sort of pride about the fact that I hardly ever showed my true emotions to others. I grew up as a middle child, which is a whole other story, but much of my life, I was just the go-with-the-flow kid who didn't cause a lot of trouble. When COVID happened, the anxiety I felt was so strong, and I couldn't hide it, especially from Matt. Even so, I tried to not really let people know what I was going through. I started secretly going to weekly therapy, and I didn't even tell my parents because I somehow felt ashamed. And if they ever see this, this is them finding out I went to therapy. Even though therapy helped, I still had some panic attacks. I remember driving home one night after doing some wedding planning, and my heart started beating super fast. I felt like I couldn't catch my breath, and sweat broke out on my forehead. I pulled into my driveway and just started sobbing. I found it hard to have a good perspective in those moments. I felt the weight of all the hard things that were going on, and I fought hard to be joyful and grateful for the good things.
So wedding planning already is pretty stressful. On top of all the things that Sarah was going through, we had a lot of things to figure out with wedding planning. Sarah was a beloved teacher at Christ Lutheran. She had been teaching there for about 4 or 5 years by then. She has a large community connection because of that. I was an intern at Trinity, which I had invested many years prior to that at, and so I also had this large connection. And so we knew we were going to have a wedding guest list that was huge. But trying to figure that out during COVID was a bit of a challenge. Who do you leave off? So it was hard, but we whittled that list down to 50. We figured by August of 2020, things will lift up, maybe a little bit. So we ended up talking to some of those people on that list, and it seemed like every time we said, hey, we want to invite you, they'd say, well, is this person invited? They would be devastated if they weren't invited. So that just caused a lot more stress. In some ways, thankfully, COVID didn't lift up. And so we actually whittled that list of 50 down to 10. At the time, in August of 2020, you could only have gatherings of 10 people. So we whittled it down to Sarah's immediate family, my immediate family, and my pastor and his immediate family. And then we had this connection up in Big Bear. There's this person we knew that owned 2 properties right next door to each other near Big Bear. So we ended up actually having our wedding there. We spent 3 days up there hiking and hanging out and playing games and having fun, and then got married at the end of that. It was, despite all the wedding planning and the stress of that in the middle of COVID, God truly was faithful during that time. He allowed us to have just the people we were the closest with to be with us in that precious moment for our wedding.
So now fast forward to the summer of 2021, we started thinking more about, the pastoral call process and began to prepare our hearts and minds for where God may be leading us. The problem was, I again began to doubt God's faithfulness. I felt anxious about potentially leaving our family and friends in California and felt very unsure about the unknown in general. I told Matt that my 2 non-negotiables would be a Target and a Trader Joe's within 20 minutes of our church. And while I was joking, this comment was an indicator of my heart posture. One day, Matt received an email from a church in Browntown, Wisconsin. They were looking for a lead pastor. I Googled the town, took one look at the map, and said, no way. There was no Target or Trader Joe's in sight. Matt and I had a conversation later that day about what it truly meant to follow God's call. I realized that I didn't even think to pause and pray about this potential call for Matt as a pastor, and instead was trapped in feelings of doubt in God's faithfulness to us. I thought if God truly were faithful, he would give me the desires of my heart and let us stay here where I am comfortable. I started to pray for God to lead us to a place where I felt peace, but also a place that I knew was where we could be ministers to.
The call process is really kind of scary. If you're open to the call process, you're open to going literally anywhere. So one of the places was possibly Browntown, Wisconsin. I started to take that a little bit seriously. I looked into Browntown, Wisconsin, started looking at homes even to see what the place was like. And when Sarah saw me doing that, she freaked out. We were also kind of on our way to go to VBS that day. VBS was during this time. So we get in the car and headed over to the church. And on the way there, Sarah just broke down. I don't want to go to Browntown, Wisconsin. And so I pulled over and we talked for a little bit and we agreed. We said, I'm not that close to finishing up seminary. I still have a whole year of seminary left. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to wait until New Year's Day, and then we'll be open to a call. But right now, I just can't take a call right now, so let's not worry about it. So fast forward a couple weeks later, Sarah's on a girls' trip with her mom and her sister down in Palm Springs. And while she's there, she sends me this text. And it's from the LCMC call list website. And I text her back and I said, Sarah, what happened to New Year's? And she said, just check it out. So I opened up the link and looked at it. It was this church that was a mid-sized church in kind of this family-oriented place. There's a Target and Trader Joe's nearby. It also had a couple colleges nearby, which was one of the things that we wanted. And just the more I looked at it, it seemed perfect for us. So we talked about it a little bit, and we were still like, okay, we said New Year's, but we were going to head out to a wedding soon, and it seemed like as time was ticking on this call process. So we were going to head out to the wedding. So at the airport, I sent an email with my application for this call. And when we got back from that wedding a couple days later, I got an email from a guy named Don Vulich. I don't know if you know who he is. But he says, we liked your application. Why don't you fill out the candidate profile? So I put that in, and I was maybe one of 10 applicants. When I threw my name into the hat, I didn't really think anything of it. I said, I still have 9 more months of seminary. I can't take a call right now. I also have 0 qualifications. I have 0 experience. So I threw my name in there, 10, and then after a while, I had an interview. It got whittled down to 3 or 5, and had another interview. It was whittled down to 3, and then in December of 2020, whatever year that is, 2021, I got the call to become the associate pastor at Christ Lutheran Church. God showed himself faithful. I saw myself as not qualified for it. I just threw my name in, not thinking anything of it. But God was faithful in leading us really just to the perfect congregation for us. God showed himself to be faithful yet again.
So once we received the news that Matt and I would be moving to Santa Clarita, we decided that we were ready to start trying for kids. Again, the doubtful thoughts came. What if we couldn't get pregnant? What if there was some hidden medical issue we didn't know about? You can imagine my surprise when I got pregnant right away, and while we are extremely grateful that the road to pregnancy was so quick, I also was not mentally ready at all to be a mother. That first trimester was really difficult for me emotionally. On top of the surge of hormones during pregnancy, I felt a depression and anxiety that wiped away any joy I should have had about this precious life growing in me. I felt totally disconnected from the baby and couldn't bring myself to feel affectionate toward her. I often had thoughts of not wanting the baby and more than once wished that I would miscarry. These thoughts were rooted in the belief that I would not love the baby or connect with her when she was born, as well as the lie that I would be a bad mom, so I shouldn't have any children. I looked back at old journal entries in preparation for today, and there's one where I am begging God for a feeling of connection to the baby and excitement about being pregnant. I told God I don't like lying to people when they talk to me about being a mom. I would ride the emotional train of feeling like I didn't want a baby and then feeling guilty about that and trying to convince myself that I did want to be a mom. These feelings of disconnect did get better as the pregnancy wore on, but I still don't really think I felt love toward my daughter until she was born and I saw her for the first time, and then everything clicked. It's hard for me to process those feelings I had before Adeline was born because they are so opposite of how I feel now. I am obsessed with her. Most nights after we put her to bed, I go on my phone and scroll through pictures and videos of Adeline because I miss her. Again, God proved himself to be faithful. While I had doubted that I could love and care for a child, God showed himself tenfold by not only allowing me to bond with my daughter, but to also give me a much stronger grasp on his love for me. I am God's child and he loves me. He is jealous for me. He wants to spend time with me even more than I want to spend time with my own child.
So that whole process was a little bit different for me. I was focused in on finishing up school, interning at Trinity, and for getting things set up so that we could move here. I had a pretty positive outlook during the pregnancy thing, and see, I wasn't the one pregnant, so there you go. So I was quite excited to become a dad. The birth actually was surreal. It was long, 37 hours of labor. But at the end of it, I got to catch Adeline, and I cut her umbilical cord, and our world completely changed the day that she was born. It seemed like we were living in a dream. However, things kind of changed when we brought her home, at least for me. And this precious girl who can only communicate with us by crying would actually make me very angry. The more she cried, the angrier I got. There were plenty of times where I walked away from her to let Sarah take care of her. And I'm not an angry type of person. Every personality test I've taken has pegged me as a peaceful type of person. And I like the peace, I like the quiet, and I like being uninterrupted. So Adeline's crying and basic neediness stole the peace and quiet of our home and interrupted a lot of things. And what I realized after what seemed like an eternity was that I idolized these things. I worshiped peace. Sure, we have a God of peace, and God is the source of all peace, but peace is a gift. I took that piece, that gift, and I lifted it up to a place in my heart where it didn't belong. I put that not only in front of God, but also in front of Adeline, my child. God was faithful in pointing this out to me. Over time, God turned to me. He repented me. I eventually started feeling more compassion towards Adeline as she cried. And I was no longer angered by it. God was faithful in conforming me more into his image and not allowing me to stay where I was.
So now we are here. Neither of us can say we predicted being where we are now, both of us working at an awesome church in Santa Clarita with a beautiful baby girl. I feel like so often I judge the Israelites for the many complaints and grumblings they had toward God, even when he provided for them over and over. And then I look at my life and I think, I'm doing the same thing. My entire life, even in difficult seasons, God has shown his faithfulness time and time again.
So all along this story, we had a 5-year plan, but you know what they say? If you want to make God laugh, you tell him what your plans are. He'll come in and change your plans, and it'll actually be for the better. When we look at the scriptures, we see him leading Israel, and their 5-year plan probably didn't look like what ended up happening. But despite our 5-year plans and their 5-year plans, God does something miraculous, and he shows himself to be good and faithful. When we look at the whole story of everything, we see a God who has a great track record. He's been faithful to thousands of generations in the past, and he's going to keep being faithful to thousands of generations today. Thank you all.